Today I want to talk to you about this idea of fake news, I'm all alone. Fake news, I'm all alone. Or if you need something that's a little bit catchier than that, turn to your neighbor and say, I'm bad all by myself. I'm bad all by myself. Here's what I know about the world that we live in and the culture that we live in. Many of us have bought into the lie that we are all on our own. We bought into the lie that no one cares about us. No one wants us to succeed. No one cares if we're here or if we're gone. No one really cares about us. The church doesn't care about us. God doesn't care about us. My family doesn't care about me. Maybe you don't have any family. Maybe you're a single person and you're like, man, I want to be in a relationship so bad, but really no one cares about me. No one wants to be in a relationship with me. Maybe you've been divorced and now your children and your ex-spouse won't speak to you anymore and you're just like, I am all alone. I'm all alone. And what happens is the enemy will use this little seed to begin to isolate you. Because the enemy's plan is to isolate you. He knows that if he can get you on your own, if he can get you away from other believers, if he can get you where he can just speak to you and there's no one else there to encourage you, there's no one else there to lift you up, if he can isolate you, then he can intimidate you and ultimately destroy your destiny. He can destroy the things that you have for yourself because even though you don't feel like it's real, there's no one else there to tell you that it's a lie. There's no one else there to tell you, hey, that's fake news. Hey, don't believe that about yourself. Don't say that about yourself. Don't confess that over your life. That's fake news. So he'll isolate you. And what's so interesting to me, and it's really sad, is the culture that we live in and the church culture that we have, we make it spiritual to be isolated. Like it's almost like the more alone you are, the more holy you are. The more people don't like you, the more you're just following God's will. You know, the more people you make mad, I'm just saying the truth. I'm just speaking the word. And so we've almost made it this badge of honor to be alone. We've almost made it this badge of honor where I'm just on my own. Nobody understands me. Nobody understands my calling. Nobody gets what I'm trying to do. It's just me and God. God's just leading me into a season of isolation. The Spirit's leading me. I don't know what Spirit. Not the Holy Spirit. Because see, Jesus was led out into the wilderness and was tempted by the devil. But I don't know if you realize this or not, but none of us is Jesus. None of us. And so God did not create us to be on our own. But the enemy has made it such a part of our culture and such a part of who we are as a generation. And I'm not just talking about young people. I'm talking about everyone that is alive today, where it's made such a thing where we feel like we are all on our own. And so there's kind of two sides of it where maybe you're in this place and to you it's, I'm all alone. I'm all alone. Or maybe you're like, I'm all alone. I'm doing this myself. I'm pulling myself up I don't need nobody. I'm a self-made person. I'm all on my own. And I just want to tell you today that that's not what God intended for you. That's not the way that God created you to live. And could it be that even though so many incredible things are happening through the church, and I'm not just talking about our church, I'm talking about the capital C church, that so many incredible things are happening in the world today. But could it be one of the major things that we are missing is this idea of being together? Because what I'm afraid of is that there are many people in this room today and through all of our services, hundreds of people are in here every Sunday, and that many of you can come in here on a Sunday and you can worship and all the earth will shout your praise. And it's great and it's awesome. And then you get in your car and I'm alone again. And I got to go home and I got to go to work tomorrow. Man, I can't wait till next Sunday because then I'll be able to feel again. But the rest of the time, like surely this isn't what God wanted. Surely this isn't what God intended. And it's not. And so I think one of the things that we are missing today is this idea of true community. Like real, not just showing up on Sunday, but really like being together. Let me read a scripture to you Acts chapter 2, verse 42. You'll hear this a lot around Oasis. If you come to Next Steps today, please come to Next Steps at 2 o'clock. You'll hear us teach a little bit more about this. But this is really the prescription for the early church. There are some things in the Bible that are descriptive. It's talking about what they did. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to do it. And then there are some things that are prescriptive. And so even though it may look different in that time, it's still something that we're supposed to do today. And so this is what it said. It says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, which is eating together, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to the number daily those that were being saved. So we all want the part where it's added daily those that are being saved. Like that's the goal. That's what we're trying to shoot for. But what I'm afraid of is that sometimes we can become unbalanced, because sometimes, depending on the church culture that you're and your background that you're from, usually as a church we'll lean kind of one way or the other. And what's so interesting to me is really it would be real easy for me to get up here and talk about awe and wonder and signs, wonders and cucumbers, like all that sort of thing. But that's one sentence. Like that's one sentence. There's one sentence that says they were in the temple together. There's one sentence that talks about us all, but then there's at least 4 different times that they talk about being together outside of church. That they talk about being together, not just in these 4 walls, but in their life they were together. And so what I have to tell you today, I know it's hard for us to understand, but we have to make sure that we're not allowing our American culture to creep in and become kingdom culture. Because I don't know if you know this or not, but there are things that we do and believe as Americans that aren't necessarily what the Bible teaches. I don't know if you knew that or not. And one of those things that I think we just have to call out and talk about is that today in 2019, and as we're leading into a new decade, 2020, we are living in what anthropologists are calling a hyper-individualistic culture. And what that means is that everything is about you as an individual. What you want, what makes you happy, your truth, what you like, what you believe, don't care about anybody else. It doesn't matter what anybody else says, how it affects anybody else, how it hurts anybody else. It's just all about you. Like you don't have to stay tied down to anybody. You don't have to have anybody hold you back. You don't have to have any accountability. You don't have to have any responsibilities. It's just all about you. And it's not just a millennial thing. It's not just a Gen Z thing. It's an all of us thing. And it's not just even this generation, but for all of time, we've had this problem where we want to make it all about us. What I want. But here's the thing. It's not working. Like you ever hear something, you're like, man, this is the answer, and then it just doesn't work? I feel that's what's happening right now. We're being told that, hey, here's the answer to your problems. Here's how to make you happy. Here's how to get over your depression. Here's how to do all these sort of things. But it's not working. Let me give you a few statistics here. 22% of Americans, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, which is a mental health organization, 22% of Americans say they always feel alone, and it negatively impacts their life. YouGov, which focuses, this is about millennials, the study shows that 22% of millennials say they have 0 friends. Not 0 close friends, not 0 best buddies, besties, 0 friends. And then many people are saying that Gen Z, which is our college students and high school students and down, is having a loneliness epidemic. That even though they're the most connected generation, even though right now you can get on the internet and you can become best friends with somebody in India, even though we have all the capabilities, we're still alone. Even though there can be people right next to us, oftentimes we'd rather be on our phone than be with those people. But then we feel alone. It's this weird thing that's going on in our culture where we all feel lonely. We all know that there's something missing, but we still keep doing the same thing over and over and over. And it's even crept into the church, like I said, where we just feel like we can do this on our own. It's just me and God. I'm just a spiritual person and I just got this. But here's the thing, you can be a spiritual person on your own, but Christianity can only happen in community. Christianity can only happen in community. Because on your own, you can just say whatever you feel. And there's nobody to say, hey, actually, you're wrong. And I know this is hard, but sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we're not good for us. And that's the thing that I'm worried about the culture that we live in today is when it's all about us, I'm the highest authority in my life and I'm not that good. I'm not that great. So it's leaving us broken. It's leaving us hurting. Did you know that those who are suffering from loneliness and isolation, which many people are according to these statistics, it's the same physical detriment to your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day? That insurance companies are starting to ask people how many close friends that they have in their life because they know if you don't have close friends, you are at a higher risk for heart disease. That our loneliness, that our isolation is starting to physically affect us. That it's not just our mental health, it's not just our emotions, it's not just our relationships, but it is actually starting to physically harm us. And what I'm worried is that we are expecting the world to fix a problem that the church should be fixing. Like what the world is missing, the church should be providing. We should be looking at the problem and saying, hey, we've got the answer. Church should have this on lock. You know what I'm saying? We should have community and friendship. We should just have that down. 2,000 years of this, you think we would have it down by now. You think we would have the formula down by now. But obviously we don't. And so what happens is so many times people will come into a church and this is maybe the one place that they think they can find love and belonging and community. And they find the same thing here that they found everywhere else in their life. They find the same thing in a church that they find in their school or on their job or in their dysfunctional family. And so could it be that God is calling us to, yes, have miracles, have signs, have wonders, have salvations, but also have this crazy thing called friendship? And save people's life. We have a suicide epidemic because people are alone. And when you're alone, you don't see any hope for the future. When you're alone, you don't see how you can get out of this situation. And so the enemy will isolate you and begin to plant things in your mind and plant things in your life that if you don't have someone else around you, you'll begin to believe. This is what the early church was. The early church was a community. Before we had a building, before we had a sound system, before we had social media, before we even had the Bible, before we had anything, the church was a community. Did you know we were a community before we were Christians? Let me explain it to you real quick. Acts chapter 11, verse 25. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year, Barnabas and Saul met with the church and taught great numbers of people. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch. So they're teaching a great number of people for a whole year, and then they're called Christians. I don't really understand that. So what you have to understand is that Antioch was a divided city. And if you can essentially think about boroughs, think about New York City, how you got the Bronx, you got Brooklyn, you got Manhattan, you got Queens, you got all these different areas. And depending on your ethnic group and depending on kind of the group that you're from, you would be sectioned in one part of that city and you would do everything in that part of the city. And people would know, kind of put it in our okay, you're one of those Round Rock people. And I'm from Pflugerville, and like, we don't talk. Like, we're different. We don't cross this boundary. It's kind of like, that would never happen today, right? Like us be divided against other people that are different from us. Like, we're so past that, you know? That's a joke. That's sarcasm. If you didn't get that, that's sarcasm. But they were divided. And so what happened is there were this group of people that were following this man named Jesus. They were the disciples of Jesus. And for some reason, they got the crazy idea that why don't we just create a community that's not divided? Like, what would happen if people from Round Rock started hanging out with people from Pflugerville? Like what would happen if people that were different ethnicities and spoke different languages and even had different core beliefs of how to do life? What if we all just started hanging out together? And what if we were unified not by the way we look or how we talk or what we like, but what if we were unified by one thing, and that's Jesus? I don't know if you realize this or not, but if you look around the room today, did you know, I don't know if you know, did you know we have Republicans and Democrats in this church? I just got to let the cat out of the bag. Did you know we have Caucasians and African Americans in this church? I don't know if you realize that or not. I just don't. I mean, I know you can't tell, you know, but what we are trying to do is we're trying to create a community that looks like the early church. We like to say that we're a 21st century expression of a first century experience. That we want to take what God did in the early church and we want to translate that to 2019. Like, now that we have live streaming and we have electricity and we have cars and we have recordings and what does that early church look like in 2019? And I'm so glad to be a part of a church. I think it looks a lot like the early church in here today. Come on, can we just give God some praise? So the early church was a community. They were together. They crossed cultural lines. They crossed boundaries. They crossed things that should divide us. Like, there are many people in this room that, according to culture and according to whatever news channel you read and according to whatever article you read, you should not be in the same room as some of the people that are in this room. Like, according to what our culture is saying, we should be divided. But it's not working. The more divided we get, the more isolated we get, the more lonely we get. And soon we're just so isolated because there's going to be nobody that's just like you. So if you're trying to find the perfect group of people that are just like you, it doesn't exist. Only you are you. And so what happens is we end up being isolated. And as I was studying this, like I said, God kind of began to shift some things. I was like, okay, God, this is great. This is awesome. It's kind of a little bit tough of a word. Kind of feels like I'm getting smacked, you know, a little bit and getting spanked a little bit. Anybody get whoopings when you're a kid? You know, you just, yeah. So I was like, kind of feels like that, God. Like, it's real tense up here. But can you just give me something to illustrate this to the people? And you know it's God when something random just comes up. Because I'll just tell you, I'm not that smart. So sometimes God will just speak something, and I'm like, where did that come from? My family, especially my mom, she'll come to me. She's like, "Where'd you get that from? Was that original, or was that Stephen Furtick? You know?" And I'm like, "No, I mean it was from me, but I'm not that smart. You know, it was God speaking to me." So I felt like God reminded me of this thing I studied way back in high school, and it was this thing called the Phalanx. Anybody heard of a Phalanx before? Cool. So I can just say whatever I want, and you'll believe it. So we're good. But what the Phalanx is this is a Greek form of a military unit. And we have a picture right here on the screen. And it was, for several hundred years, this was the best infantry unit that you could do. There was nothing that could defeat it. There was nothing that could come against it. And so what you see a group of men, it's about 10 wide, about 16 deep. But these men, they would live together, they ate together, they slept together, they knew each other, they were closer than you can imagine. And they would get in this formation, and if you can help me, Stephen, they had a few things with them. This is totally authentic, by the way, just to show you this. They had a few tools with them. So they had a shield, they had a short sword, and then they had a spear. I couldn't get the spear on Amazon, so just imagine it. But they had these tools, and what would happen is they would be in this close unit, and the people in the front, you can't really tell because this is more of a marching formation, but when they would get settled of where they're supposed to be, the people in the front would squat down, and they would cover part of their body. This shield's a little bit too small, but just imagine this covering a part of my body. And then the people behind them would kind of do like a sorority squat, you know what I'm saying? They would kind of squat like this, and some of you didn't get that, it's okay. And they would cover, and what would happen is when they would all get in formation, it would just be a wall of shields. And it was essentially impenetrable. And so then they would stick out these spears because you couldn't shoot arrows at them. You couldn't shoot darts at them because it would just hit the shield. Nothing could break through. So what people started trying to do is they started trying to charge with horses and with all these different things. And what would happen is before you could get to the unit, before you could get to the people, you would hit the spears. And as one group of spears would break, they would move back, someone would take their place, and the other group of spears would go down. And so this military formation was essentially unstoppable. And so what they could do is they could post up, and there could be numerous people coming against them. They could be outnumbered, like it could be a crazy number of people. And as long as they stayed together and stayed in formation, they would be safe. They would be fine. And I was like, well, that's a great history lesson, Jesus, but what does it got to do with church, you know? And I just feel like God began to speak to me about how we're called to be in a formation similar to this. Because there's so many things that are similar to this formation of what God has called us to do as a community. Because people were so close together that they were protecting each other. There were people that were helping them stay on pace. There was a person in the very back that would keep them on pace to where they wouldn't run out at different times. They wouldn't try to step at different times, but they would all step together. And when they stepped together, they were able to take territory. They were able to push back the enemy. And as long as they stayed together, they were safe. And so God gave me a few things that I want you to write down. Point number one from this idea is if you're going to fight against this loneliness, if you're going to do what God has called us to do as a community, number one, you have to stay close. You have to stay close. The interesting thing about this is the closeness of their shield covered the other person. So if you can just imagine, I know this is super authentic, but just imagine with me. They held their shields like this. And so your shield would cover part of your body and part of the person's next to you. And so if you did not have someone on this side, you were exposed. And what I felt like God was speaking to me is so many of us, we are not close enough to people for them to protect us. That God has placed people in our life and they want to protect us. They want to cover our weakness. They want to cover our vulnerable spot, but we won't get close enough to them for them to cover it. And we can't cover it on our own. We have to have someone else cover it for us. Because I don't know if you realize this or not, but you can't keep yourself accountable. Like you can't discipline yourself. You can't correct you need other people in your life that are like, hey, I see this thing that you're doing and it's not really right. And so I need to call this out on you. But what's sad is most of us, the reason that we don't get close to people is because we're too prideful. We don't want people to see our weaknesses. We don't want people to see our problems. We don't want people to see the things that we're struggling with. So we would rather just be out on our own. And man, I may get hit, I may not, but I don't want anybody to see this part of my life. But your pride can't protect you. I was getting trained by a trainer at the gym a couple weeks ago, and it was one of those free sessions. Like I knew he was trying to sell me stuff, and I was like, I'm not paying you, but I'll take the free thing, you know? Anybody do that? Timeshares, you're like, you're not going to sell me, but I'll get that $100. And so he was like, well, what do you want to train on? What do you want to work on? And I was like, well, you know, I know how to do some of the lifts, but I don't know. I feel like I don't have the proper technique. And so we went to the bench press and I showed him what I could do. And he was like, all right, well, you know, let me try to show you how to do it. And my pride kind of jumped up a little bit because I was like, bro, I'm bigger than you. You know, I'm stronger than you. What you going to tell me? You know, like maybe it's just me. Okay. And so he sat down and he was like, okay, well, let me show you. You need to do this with your elbows. You need to arch your back like this. You need to do this. You need to do this. I'm like, okay, well, let me try this. And instantly, with a few just small tweaks, I was able to bench press almost 50 more pounds than I could before. But I had been trying to do it on my own, and I couldn't see where my mistakes were. I couldn't see where my form was messed up. And so it only took about 30 seconds with someone that was close to me that could say, hey, you need to fix this, you need to fix this, and now you're able to carry the weight. Some of you are trying to carry a weight. You got to have people in front of you. Yes, God's called you to do that, but unless you have somebody next to you that can correct you, you're not going to be able to handle the weight. So you got to stay close to people. We cover our weaknesses with community. If you're wondering how to get over your weakness, you can't do it on your own. You got to have someone else covering for you. Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. Because most of us, we don't want to care about anybody else's problems. Like, I got my own problems. I'm worried about the arrows flying at me. Why should I be worried about this person's arrows? But as Christians, come on, not as just people, but as Christians, we're called to do things a little bit differently. So we have to carry the burdens of other people. The second thing that you have to do if you want to get over this loneliness, if you want to stay in Christian community, is you have to stay in alignment. You have to stay in alignment. You could feel like you're exposed because of who you're aligned with. Let me explain it to you. In the Phalanx, and I know it's a weird word to say, I'm being careful. But when you say this, there were no left-handed men allowed in this formation. Because everyone had to have the shield on their right side. If they had it on their left side, then not only would it leave them exposed, but it would leave the person next to them exposed. And so they had to make sure everyone was in alignment and that everyone was carrying the shield the same way. And so what I felt like God was speaking to me is there are people that are dressed in the same armor as you. There are people that are carrying the same weapons as you. There are people that look a lot like you, but they are not in the same alignment as you. They're not in the same formation that you're in. They're not doing the thing that it may be fine the way they're doing it. It may be great. It may be godly. It may be what they're called to do, but it's not lining up with what God has called you to do. And I just want to say this just pastorally. If you feel like you can't line up with what God is doing at Oasis, we hope that that's not the case, but please make sure you're in alignment with someone. Because here's what happens is we will feel like we are not in alignment. We'll feel like we're exposed. And instead of finding someone to be in alignment with, instead of finding someone to be in community with, instead of finding someone that we can do life with, we'll just say, well, this is just how I'm just going to do this on my own. I can never find my place. Nobody ever accepts me. Nobody likes me for who I am. Nobody understands my calling. Nobody understands my person. I'm going to just do this on my own. And so what happens is people will leave the formation, they'll leave the blessing and the protection of God and community, and they'll step out on their own. And now they're all on their own and most likely will be killed because they're not in the protection of the formation. But also what can happen is when one person steps out of alignment, it can destroy the integrity of the rest of the group. So if the one person got out of alignment in the formation, they were no longer a solid shield. They were no longer impenetrable. Now the enemy had a way to get in. And what I'm afraid that happens sometimes is people will come into churches, they'll come into friends groups, they'll come into communities, they'll come, whatever it may be, and people will leave that group and they don't realize that not only are they exposing themselves, but they're also exposing the people they're leaving. Because sometimes you will have to stay in formation just to protect the other people that are around you. Sometimes it won't feel good, you won't like it, but you will have to stay in that formation to protect the other people, to carry their burdens, to carry them. This one's gonna be hard, so I just take a water before this. God will sometimes put people in your community that you don't like. I would just say, God will sometimes put people in your community that you don't like. Well, You don't know what they did to me last year. Well, you don't know what they said about me. Well, you don't know what their family's done. You don't know about, you don't know. I don't really know if I can be in the same group as them. Have you ever heard someone use the expression before, they're a Judas? They're like, that person's a Judas. And usually people use it in the expression of, I'm going to separate myself from this person because I know that at some point they're going to betray me, they're going to hurt me, they're going to offend me, they're going to do something to me. And I was thinking about that this week, and it was interesting to me that the expression comes from the disciple Judas, who was with Jesus for 3 years, and then was with Jesus, and Jesus washed his feet, and then he went on to betray Jesus and eventually killed himself because of the shame and the guilt. And I was like, it's interesting to me that we would think we have the option to separate ourselves from someone when even Jesus himself, who knows the end from the beginning, that knows all things, said, even though I know Judas is going to betray me, I'm still going to wash his feet. What if there's people in your life that you don't like, that they've done things to you, they've said things to you, but God's like, I still want you to wash their feet. I still want you to serve them. I still want you to love them. I still want you to pray for them. Because Peter and Judas both betrayed Jesus. And none of us say, hey, don't be that person's a Peter. It's not really something we say. Because they both betrayed Jesus, but one stuck around long enough to step into what God had created him to do. One felt the guilt and the shame and ended up killing and ending his destiny and his calling and his life. And the other stuck around long enough for Jesus to bring him back into the fold and say, Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Feed my sheep. And so be very careful that there's someone in your life. Be very careful that you don't cut them out when they're the person that you need in the future. Because if Jesus would have cut Peter out of the situation, if he had cut him out of the equation, then Peter wouldn't have been there in Acts chapter 2 to preach the first message. He wouldn't have been there to take the gospel to the Jews. He wouldn't have been there to do all the things that God has created him to do. And I think there may be people in your life right now that you don't really like. They get on your nerves. Maybe they haven't done anything to you. They just aren't your type of people. And God's like, I know you don't like it right now, but 2 years from now, you're going to need them. And if you cut them off right now, they're not going to be able to do what you need in the future. They're not going to be able to encourage you. They're not going to be able to pray for your kids. They're not going to be able to take care of you when you're sick. They're not going to be able to provide for you. They're not going to be able to do because you haven't given them the chance. So sometimes God will put people in your life that you don't like. Colossians chapter 3, verse 13 says this. These are fun scriptures. These are encouraging scriptures. Bear with each other. Like sometimes you just got to bear people. Like I'm bearing you right now. And forgive one another if any of you have grievances against someone. Like that's Bible. No matter like how you feel. Doesn't matter like what they said. Just says you got to forgive them. And what I love says forgive as the Lord forgave you. Because I guarantee you, nobody's done something to you that is worse than what you've done to the Lord. I guarantee you that no one has betrayed you as much as you betrayed the Lord. And it's no condemnation. There's free forgiveness. God has already given you the opportunity. He's already forgiven you. He's already died on the cross. I'm not trying to condemn you. I'm just trying to show you, why do we think that we're so great that, I can't forgive them when Christ forgave us. So you got to stay in alignment. Sometimes you got to stay in alignment with people around you that you don't like, that don't look like you. And then the third thing is, you have to keep pace with the people around you. Keep pace with the people around you. You have to stay in step with your community. This military formation, they knew with all of these men, it would be very easy for them to start to get out of step with each other, for this side to start going faster than the other side, for the back to start pushing forward, for the people in the front to leave the people that are in the back. And they knew if they didn't stay together as a unit that the whole thing was ruined. So they had the person in the back just keeping the pace. I know I'm not on rhythm, it's okay. Need a metronome. But here's the thing. Individualistic culture, God, I'm quicker than, like, I already got it, God. Like, they're slow. I'm good. I'm ready to go like this. Let's go. Let's go. That's Tony. He's like, let's go. And God's like, no, if you go like this, you're going to die. If you run ahead of the protection that God has given you, if you run ahead of the grace that he has put, if you run ahead of his pace, you're no longer in his protection. And so sometimes you'll feel like you're being pushed by other people. You're like, I don't want to stop pushing. I don't want to go forward. Sometimes you'll feel like other people are dragging you down. Man, I just don't know. Like, can we just be real? Trust me, I've heard it. I just don't. Oasis, I thought they were doing something, but I just feel like God is calling me to something accelerated and faster, hyper speed. I am just ready to go into all, and I'm just, that's great. But just know that if you leave the protection of your community, you're all on your own. And again, this is a plan of the enemy to isolate you. Because the enemies knew with this formation, they could not destroy them from the front. The only way that you could stop this formation was by going around them and attacking them from the back. The enemy knows that he can't attack you from the front. He knows that on his own power, he can't stop the destiny that God has for your life. He knows that he cannot stop what God has called you to do. He knows, the enemy knows the word. I don't know if you know this or not, but even so, just throwing that out there. So he knows what's been spoken about him. He knows that no weapon formed against us will prosper. He knows it. And so what will happen is if he can't get in front of you and stop you, he'll get behind you and push you. Because he knows if he can get behind you and push you out of alignment and push you out of pace and push you out of what God has placed you and what he has called you to do, then you're exposed. And so he will try to push you and say, man, you are better than them. You are more anointed than them. You are smarter than them. You do deserve that person. That person you married, that was a mistake. You do deserve that person you're looking at your work. Like you, let's get real. Come on. Like you, oh yeah, you're so great. You're so all, you go. And then you're going to look around and you're going to realize I'm all on my own. And that's where we are as people in the world today. We've bought into the lie. Go. You're on your own. You're all alone. And you can do it. You can accomplish. You're better by yourself. You can go faster. You can do more. I've said it before, the old saying that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So we've got to fight against this lie that we can do it all on our own because it's not working. I don't think I have to convince you about that today.